Continue our Gemara, Yoma, Daf Ayin Dalad Amud Beis, Yoma 74b. The last thing we discussed was how we know that one is required to fast on Yom Kippur. The word the verse uses is inui, which means to inflict pain upon oneself. And who said that inflicting pain upon oneself means to deny oneself food and drink? And we had a lengthy discussion in the last class about that. And the final word was in that we compared the word inui, inflicting pain upon oneself, and associated with Yom Kippur, and we compared that word to the same word used elsewhere in relation to the manna. Namely, Moshe Rabbeinu tells the Jewish people, "Vayancha vayayidvecha." God afflicted pain upon you, and he starved you, and then he fed you the manna. And the idea of the verse they're saying is that God starved you and fed you manna so that we should learn the lesson that we don't rely on bread to survive, but we rely on the word of God to survive. And therefore we have to wait for God to give us food. And that's what the manna teaches us on this basic level. And because the word there to describe this idea that God afflicted pain upon us by starving us and then giving us the manna, the word there is vayancha, and God afflicted pain upon you. The root word is inui, afflicting pain. And that same word is used to describe how we mark Yom Kippur. So we know that the word afflicting pain upon yourself means to starve oneself in the same way the verse describes it by the manna. So having raised the issue of the manna, the Talmud now goes on to discuss a bit about the manna. So just to give you an overlay of how it's going to play out. First, the Talmud is going to give us an introductory comment about the manna in general. Then the Talmud is going to go on a little sidetrack, giving us tips and advice and wisdom from King Solomon. And then the Talmud is going to get back to discussion on the manna at length. This sequence, introduction remarks on the manna, advice from King Solomon, and then further discussion of the manna is significant, and perhaps we'll discuss that on another occasion. For today, we're going to discuss just the introductory remarks on the manna, and then we're going to discuss the advice from King Solomon. But I want you to keep in mind that this is kind of a sequence, and it's going to be important, especially the way we're going to offer insight into what the Talmud means here. It's going to help us understand the sequence as we go later. And it's all going to be tied up to Yom Kippur as well, as we'll see as we go along. So let's begin. So you can see my pointer. I'm over here. The verse reads, "Hamachilcha man b'midbar." God fed you man in the desert, laman anoischa, to afflict pain upon you. Now, the verse I mentioned earlier, where Moshe says, "Vayancha vayarivecha," that God afflicted pain upon you by starving you. So there, the afflicting pain is obviously talking about the lack of food, and then he gives you the manna. But here it says, God fed you man in the desert, laman anoischa, in order to pain you, as if there's some sort of pain associated with the manna. So what's the pain associated with the manna? So the Gemara tells us, Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi, two scholars, were discussing this issue. Chad Amar, one said, the pain associated with the manna is the fact that one cannot compare someone who has literally bread in his basket to one who does not have bread in his basket. What that means is, in addition to eating now and getting satisfied, there's also comfort in the knowledge that I have bread in my basket for tomorrow. I know how I'm going to be able to survive tomorrow. But if I ate every last morsel of bread I had, and I have no more bread in my basket, and I have no idea what I'm going to eat tomorrow, then there's an anxiety associated with the fact that I'm now eating the last morsel of bread I have. And this is with the experience of the Jews with the manna, because every day they were given an exact amount to survive that day, and they had no bread in their basket for tomorrow. And there was an anxiety. What am I eating tomorrow? And the truth is, this was the point. The point was they should trust in Hashem that God's going to provide. He provided today, he'll provide tomorrow. Don't be anxious. That was kind of the point, which has its lesson for us today, obviously, as well. We understand that God provides for us. Our parnasa is not our own doing, but God's blessing. And therefore, the anxieties of where we're going to get parnasa in the future shouldn't be there. Knowing in full confidence and faith that God provided for us until now, he will continue to do so in the future. And this is a lesson learned from the manna associated with anoischa, some sort of pain because of the anxiety that one has, not knowing where it's coming from tomorrow, and the lesson there to let go of that anxiety and having trust in Hashem. So that's one understanding of what the pain associated with the manna is. The other is, here's my pointer, the other says, one cannot compare one who sees the food that they are eating to one who does not see the food they're eating. Now what this means is, as Rashi explains for us, the Talmud is going to tell us in the next page that the manna tasted like whatever the person who was eating it so desired. But the appearance of the manna remained the same. And what this view is telling us, either of Ami or of Asi, is that part of enjoying eating is not just the taste of the food, but there's actually the visual presentation, right? Eating is a full sensory experience. You want to smell the food, you want to see the food, you want to be presented, right? You go to a restaurant, you don't just want a good tasting steak, you want it to be nicely plated, right? It's a whole art to plate up food so that it's pleasing to the eyes, and that enhances the eating experience. So even though the manna tasted like whatever they wanted, there's a pain associated there because the enjoyment is not complete because the visual wasn't there. And therefore, Rav Yosef comments and says, from here we have an allusion to the idea, that blind people that they eat, the ain stay in, but they don't get fully satisfied, or at least their satisfaction isn't in the same level as someone who's not blind. You should note that Rav Yosef himself was blind. Amar Abaye says, Hilchach, therefore, one who has a meal, should only eat it during daytime when he's capable of seeing the food because he'll enjoy it much more. Okay, so this is the simple level. On a deeper spiritual level, we know that food is symbolic of Torah study. This is explained in chapter 5 of Tanya. In the same way one eats food, digests it, and becomes part of the physical body, so likewise, one ingests Torah ideas, digests it in their mind, and then it becomes part of the way he thinks, it becomes part of who he is. It's food. And therefore, there are two things here. In the same way, the manna was free food from heaven, which is amazing. It's miraculous, but it has a downside. The downside is, as the Zohar says, the manna is called nama de kisufa, bread of shame. And the reason why it's bread of shame is because we didn't work for it. You much more appreciate that which you worked for and you earned. And therefore, that leads to these two things. The manna from heaven, literal food, and then symbolically Torah, is such that in the desert, just like the manna, they were given free food, they were given free Torah. The relationship to God was free. They didn't earn it. They actually just came out of Egypt, and they kept on saying they want to go back to Egypt. And they kept on complaining, and they kept on complaining because they were spiritually and physically spoiled. They were just given free Torah from heaven. And because they didn't work for it, because they didn't work for their Torah, right, and they didn't, in a sense, truly appreciate the blessing of God giving them free food and free Torah. Right? When you are working every day to make a living, and then some deal that you weren't expecting to go through, bam, it goes through. You appreciate God's blessing there in such an amazing way because of all the effort you put into it. And then all of a sudden, it just, the blessing came flowing through beyond your expectation. But that miracle that goes beyond your expectation is appreciated because of the effort you put in. And therefore, you can actually learn, in some sense, to trust Hashem that He's going to do for you again later. But when you're constantly getting it for free, you lose appreciation for its value, both for Torah and for business. I work and work and work to study Torah, and then God grants me the capacity to fully understand it. I appreciate the miracle of Hashem giving me the Torah. When it's given to me for free, I kind of expect, like, oh, of course it's supposed to be here. It's mine. It's free. Like a child who the parent gives them a gift, and then one day they don't get the gifts that they expected to get, they start kicking and screaming. But when you're an adult and you understand the value of things because you work for things, you don't expect them as much, and you appreciate them much more. And this perhaps is also what it means that they didn't see the food they were eating. They were enjoying Torah, and they enjoyed every part of it. The taste was all there. But they didn't see the great value in it because they didn't work for it. Perhaps this is what it means. And therefore, notwithstanding the fact that our forefathers in the desert were on a much higher level than we were, because they were given free gifts and free miracles and free Torah, And maybe I'm sure they even had better understanding of Torah than we did. But the appreciation of it, the appreciation of the gift of Torah, and to see its true value specifically comes through us who don't get a free lunch, and we work hard for both for our living and for the Torah that we get. Now, since we're on the topic of seeing things, the Talmud now redirects a bit to talk about some advice from King Solomon related to seeing things. Omer Rabbi Zera says, Mikra, what's the meaning of the verse? And if you can see this, the verse is, here you can see number 7, where is it? The verse is in Koheles, Perek Vav, Pasuk Tes, Ecclesiastes, chapter 6, verse 9. And it says, Mikra, what's the meaning of the verse? Toiv Mara Einayim, the sight of eyes are good, Mahalach Nefesh, better than the actual going there. So seeing something is somehow better than going there. What does this mean? So Omer Reish Lakish says, I assume this is Rabbi Zera speaking in the name of Reish Lakish because he's the one who introduced this verse, unless Rabbi Zera is asking and Reish Lakish is responding. I'm not sure. But Reish Lakish says, the meaning of the verse is as follows. Toiv Mare Nayim Bi'isha. The vision of looking at a beautiful woman is more enjoyable, more than the actual act of being with her. Shneimar, as the verse reads, greater is the vision than the actual going there. Okay, I just realized I misunderstood something. Rabbi Zera, when he quoted the verse, is actually quoting this verse to support it, to support the idea mentioned before. Before we mentioned that enjoying the food or seeing the food is a crucial part of enjoying the food. So Rabbi Zera is asking Mikra, what's the verse to back up the idea? And there's Tov Marei Einayim Mahalach Nefesh, greater is seeing than actually doing it. In other words, it's greater to see the food than to actually eat the food. Right? Then, on the heel, having quoted that verse, then Reish Lakish says another interpretation of the verse. Okay, just to clarify what the Gemara meant there. I realize as I'm reading it now that I missed that important point. Okay, so Rabbi Zera quotes the verse to back up the idea of the manna, in that seeing food is more important than the actual eating it, is more important than the actual experience. And Reish Lakish says that seeing a beautiful woman is more enjoyable than the actual act. Shneimar, the verse reads, I'm better the vision of the eyes, Mahalach Nefesh, than actually going through there yourself, going through with the actions. Now, a few comments. First of all, Reish Lakish himself has an interesting history with this. I think I mentioned this a number of times in the classes here, that Reish Lakish started out as a thief, as a bandit who was well known for womanizing, essentially. And one day he's walking down the riverbank and he sees across the river something or someone that looks like a very beautiful woman. And so he jumps across the river to, meet her. And it turns out it's a man. And the man's name was Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan was a very good-looking man. And Rabbi Yochanan said, if you come to study Torah with me, I'll introduce you to my sister who's even more beautiful than me. And Reish Lakish goes, studies Torah, does teshuvah, marries Rabbi Yochanan's sister, and the two become best friends and chavrosas, study partners. And they're often quoted together, Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. They were quoted earlier before about chatzi shir, about eating less than the requisite amount of punishment. That was Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. So he has some experience with this idea of seeing women. And perhaps what he's saying is as follows. The fantasy of the sin is much more, elaborate than the actual act. In other words, the way we think it's going to be and how amazing it's going to be when we envision it is much more embellished than what it actually is in reality. And if that's the case, perhaps Reish Lakish is giving us advice in dealing with it, dealing with sin, dealing with the desire for sin. When a person sees something beautiful and really wants it, and it's difficult to control it. So perhaps what Reish Lakish is saying, and taking this verse from King Solomon, perhaps what he's saying is, think it all the way through. When you're done, how are you going to feel about it? How are you going to feel about it when you're done? 100% of the time, when you're done, you're going to look back and say, that was not as good as I thought it was going to be. And if that's the case, let it go. It's your eyes playing a trick on you. It's your eyes and your imagination playing a trick on you. Your yetzer, your inclination playing a trick on you to tell you how amazing it's going to be. And then when you go through with it, not worth it. So this is perhaps an advice. It's similar to Who is wise, the one who sees the outcome. Meaning, before you go through with the action, think of what's going to be the result of it. And that's what this verse is saying. The fantasy you have about it is much more enticing than the actual reality of it. So just drop it, because when you're done, you're going to look back and say, that was such a waste of time. In fact, this is something I heard from the Rebbe once in a recorded talk. Very beautiful talk, and I'm not going to go into the whole length of it, but the kernel of it is as follows. The evil inclination itself doesn't want you to sin. How do we know this? Because the evil inclination was created for a purpose by God. What was the purpose of the evil inclination? The purpose of the evil inclination is to challenge you so that you have to summon deeper powers and overpower it. Which means every time the Yetzer Hara entices you to do something negative, what it's hoping for is that you won't go through with it. It's actually hoping that you will not go through with it. And therefore what happens is, when you actually do go through with the sin, even the evil inclination turns around and looks at you and says, what a waste of time. And this is perhaps even a deeper layer of what this verse means here. The fantasy you had was toiv. That was good. It was a enticing fantasy. But then when you went through with it, the whole thing was a waste of time. And actually that verse concludes, you can look at the verse over here. Toiv marei einayim mahalach nefesh. Better is the vision to the eyes, the fantasy of the sin. Mahalach nefesh, after going through with it. Gam zeh hevel v'rois ruach. This too, of going through with it, is a waste, vanity, and bad spirit. Meaning the evil inclination itself, which gave you that fantasy, at the end of it, when you go through it, is going to look at you and say, what a waste of time. The whole point why I entice you to do this is so you can overcome, and here you are, you failed. And therefore, to start with, use this as a tactic against that desire. By reminding yourself that as great as the fantasy for that sin is right now, it's when you go through with it and you're done, you're going to look back and say, that was such a stupid waste of time. So why put yourself through the pain? This is first advice from King Solomon in this series of advice from King Solomon. The next is the verse which reads, okay, there's number 8. We can scroll back up here. It's in Mishlei, Proverbs, chapter 23, verse 31. The verse reads, Ki yitein b'kois einoi, one who puts his eye into a glass, yishalach b'mesharim, will walk straight forward. Now, what does this mean? So Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi were discussing this verse. The same two people discussing the verse earlier with regard to what the infliction of pain related to the Manna is. Chad Amar, one of the two, either Rabbi Ami or Rabbi Asi, said, anybody who puts his eye, now we go to Ayin Hamid Aleph, 75a, B'koisai, anyone who puts his eye into the cup. And if we can see the Rashi here, I think Rashi says, Oyev Shikros, putting his eye into the glass means he loves getting drunk. Not just once in a while gets drunk, but loves getting drunk. So anybody who's like that, Arroyu is kolon doimo salav kamishar. All licentious, that's the word, and wrong lusts look perfect to him. Whatever lust he can get his hands on, he's going to take. If he loves the glass, his eyes are on the cup. That's one interpretation. The other one says, anyone who puts his eye to the glass, to the cup, he loves drunkenness. All property in the world seems to be ripe for the taking. So this is advice number 2, reminding us to keep our head on and keep clarity of vision and not to wallow in, God forbid, alcoholism. Because what it's going to lead to is not just a question of, the deterioration of the body, but also the very soul itself. He looks around the world and he's constantly looking for, just fill me with something that I can say is going to be, is going to be fun. Give me whatever it is. And everything that anything possible, any property, any woman, seems to him to be ripe for the taking. And that's obviously a terrible state to be in. Third item of wisdom / advice from King Solomon with the interpretations of Rav Ami and Rav Asi. This is a verse in, there's a 1, let's look for the 1. It's on the side here. Mishlei, Proverbs, chapter 12, verse 25. Daiga b'lev, one who has worry in his heart, yisachena, he shall, there's 2 interpretations to the word yisachena. So let's see what the word yisachena means. Person has anxiety, he has worry in his heart, yisachena. That's what King Solomon says to do. So what does this mean? Rav Ami and Rav Asi were discussing this. Chad Amar 1 says, yisachena medaita, you should push it out of his mind. Completely ignore it. Redirect your attention to something else. Something's causing you anxiety, think about something else. This is kind of, in some ways, similar to what Tanya says, that even if a person doesn't have control over the ideas and feelings, but a person has the control over his thoughts. And the more one thinks about something, the more one cares for it, which is actually important because that's the word here, daitoi, das. We know from Tanya, Chassidus, that there are three, in Kabbalah, there are 3 levels, 3 parts to the mind, chachma, bina, das, wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. And as explained in Tanya, the word das, knowledge, doesn't just mean knowing more information, but actually attaching oneself to that thing. And attaching oneself to that thing in one's mind is what breeds emotion. So take, for example, anger. Someone does something to slight me. I'm not necessarily angry within the second after the person did that thing. Let's say the person hit me, God forbid. So I'm not angry necessarily right away. It's only after I spend some time to think about it, and then that thing becomes so real to me. Oh my gosh, look how insulting it was. The person hit me. Now I'm angry. So the anger isn't really born of what the person did to me, but actually I'm angry by way of how I thought about what that person did to me. And that's das. It's not just about acquiring new information, because I already knew right from the beginning that the person did something terrible to me. What caused me to get angry is that I've connected to this fact. Oh my gosh, look how bad this person is to me. And therefore, the first piece of advice in getting rid of anxiety is stop overindulging the thoughts about it, right? A person's worried about something happening. Your thinking about it is not going to stop it from happening, right? The thinking itself is not going to change the reality. It's only going to cause you anxiety. So you can choose to think about something else. That's the first piece of advice from either Rav Ami or Rav Asi interpreting this word, yisachena. Now, obviously, I should put this out there. We're not talking about someone who suffers from mental illness and clinical depression and clinical anxiety. For that, you got to go to a professional. But just normal, everyday anxieties. Think about it when you need to fix the problem, and when it's not time to fix the problem, think about something else. Now, Achad Amar, the other one, says that the word yisachena means to speak, like sach, to talk. Yisachena lacherim. You should talk it over with somebody else. Now, Rashi interprets that to mean, perhaps the person will give you advice. That's one way of understanding it. And perhaps another thing is, not just because the person's going to give you advice, but just the very talking it over with somebody else is already relieving of the anxiety. And this is something we all experience. Misery loves company, right? It's very difficult to carry anxiety when you feel like you're alone in this anxiety. And the feelings of being alone in the anxiety is sometimes worse than the inherent anxiety, right? And something's, a person has a secret that really hurts them. Something about their lives. And the biggest fear almost some of the times is, does anybody else know? Or not just anybody else know, but also it's like, I'm the only one carrying this. I have to carry this whole burden myself. And when you let go of that and you allow yourself to share what you're feeling and your anxieties with somebody else, all of a sudden you feel much lighter. And perhaps that's also what this means. We're going to stop over here, but there's still a few more verse interpretations that are not on the subject of Manna before we get back to the Manna, but that, God willing, is going to come tomorrow. Have a wonderful day.